When Vegeta first appeared in Dragon Ball Z, few could have predicted the long, winding journey his character would take. He wasn't just another villain. He was a declaration that Dragon Ball's world was about to get much larger, much darker, and far more dangerous. Introduced as the proud prince of the Saiyan race, Vegeta embodied everything ruthless and terrifying about the warrior lineage Goku himself had unknowingly come from. He was not driven by compassion, justice, or even a simple hunger for battle like Goku. Instead, Vegeta was consumed by pride, arrogance, and an unshakable belief in his own superiority. At this stage, Vegeta's role in the story was crystal clear. He was the opposite of Goku. If Goku represented selflessness, optimism, and growth, Vegeta represented selfishness, cruelty, and a fixation on power. His massacre of innocents, his cold dismissal of Nappa when he became useless, and his obsession with defeating Kakarot made him one of the darkest antagonists the series had yet produced. From the very beginning, redemption felt unthinkable. Toriyama painted him as a character defined by sin, a genocidal prince whose pride outweighed even his survival instincts. And yet, Vegeta's presence also expanded the scope of Dragon Ball. He introduced the audience to the Saiyan race's brutal history, provided a mirror for Goku's own origins, and pushed the story beyond simple good versus evil battles into deeper questions about heritage, destiny, and choice. Vegeta's first fight with Goku is not only one of the most iconic battles in the franchise, it's also the thematic foundation of his entire arc. Here was a man who had lived his whole life believing in the natural superiority of his royal bloodline, only to be pushed to the brink by a low-class warrior who had surpassed him in every meaningful way. This humiliation would become the spark that ignited the rest of Vegeta's journey. For a character built entirely on pride, being defeated by Goku planted the seeds of something he had never known before: doubt. But at this point in the story, redemption was nowhere in sight. If anything, Vegeta seemed destined to remain a villain. He survived the battle on Earth, and his cold, bitter promise to return was a reminder that his pride could not accept defeat. His character was locked in place, unyielding, merciless, and fully defined by his hatred for Goku. Yet, as Dragon Ball has always done with its greatest characters, what seemed fixed would soon begin to bend. And in Vegeta's case, the arc from prideful tyrant to reluctant ally would become one of the richest and most human transformations in the entire franchise. The moment Vegeta left Earth after his humiliating defeat, his arc subtly began to shift. At first, he was still the same cold-blooded Saiyan prince, furious at his failure, humiliated by Goku, and obsessed with proving his superiority. But what distinguishes Vegeta from many other Dragon Ball villains is that his story didn't end there. Toriyama didn't discard him as just another stepping stone for Goku. Instead, Vegeta was allowed to continue evolving, gradually intertwining his path with the Z Fighters in a way that blurred the lines between ally and enemy. The most important step in this transformation came during the Namek saga. When Vegeta set foot on Namek, he was no longer the confident conqueror he once was. Instead, he was a rogue warrior navigating a dangerous galaxy, suddenly positioned between two colossal forces, Frieza and the Earthlings. His survival now depended on strategy, cunning, and, most shockingly of all, occasional cooperation with people he once would have slaughtered without hesitation. Here, we begin to see cracks in his hardened exterior. While Vegeta still sought the Dragon Balls for selfish reasons, his encounters with Gohan, Krillin, and eventually Goku revealed something fascinating. He could work alongside others, even if begrudgingly. These alliances were born out of necessity, but the very fact that Vegeta tolerated them hinted at something greater beneath the surface. For the first time, the Saiyan Prince's pride was challenged not just by Goku's strength, but by his circumstances. He was forced to acknowledge that survival sometimes required trust. Then came the defining moment of Vegeta's early transformation, his death at the hands of Frieza. Up until this point, Vegeta had always carried himself with an air of invincibility. Even in defeat, his pride shielded him from vulnerability. But as Frieza crushed him with overwhelming power, something extraordinary happened. Vegeta broke. He cried, not out of weakness, but out of a lifetime's worth of repressed pain and injustice. Through his tears, Vegeta revealed the truth of the Saiyan race's destruction. He wasn't just a villain hungry for power. He was a survivor of genocide, raised under the tyranny of the very monster he now faced. His pride had been a mask, concealing years of trauma and desperation. In this moment, for the first time, the audience, and even Goku, saw Vegeta as more than an antagonist. He was a tragic figure, shaped by forces beyond his control. When Vegeta begged Goku to defeat Frieza, it was more than a plea for revenge. It was a surrender of pride, a recognition that someone else, someone he had hated and envied, was the only one who could achieve justice for their fallen people. This marked the first step in Vegeta's redemption arc, though at the time, it might not have felt like it. His death wasn't heroic in the conventional sense. He hadn't laid down his life to protect others. But his vulnerability, his acknowledgement of Goku's potential, and his raw honesty made this scene a turning point. And crucially, this moment planted the seeds of Vegeta's humanity. When he was revived later on, he didn't immediately abandon his pride or hatred. But something had changed. He had been humbled by both defeat and mortality. He had confronted the weight of his past in a way that could not be undone. From this point onward, Vegeta's journey was no longer simply about proving himself stronger than Goku. It was about grappling with what it meant to survive, what it meant to fight, and what it meant, though he would never admit it at first, to care about something greater than himself. In many ways, the Namek saga redefined Vegeta's place in the series. He was no longer just a villain. He was a rival, an uneasy ally, and most importantly, a character capable of growth. The seeds of change had been planted, and though it would take years for them to fully blossom, Vegeta's redemption arc had begun in earnest. By the time the Android and Cell sagas unfolded, Vegeta's evolution had entered a new phase. No longer a straightforward antagonist, he had become something far more complex, an anti-hero. This transformation was subtle but undeniable, rooted in both his personal growth and the practical demands of the battles he faced. Unlike before, Vegeta's focus was no longer purely on destruction or defeating Goku. It was about survival, pride, and surprisingly, family. During the Android saga, Vegeta's obsession with surpassing Goku remained his driving force, but it now came with a critical layer: the realization that power alone was not enough. Training under intense conditions, he achieved Super Saiyan, finally reaching the level of strength that had long eluded him. Yet this victory was tinged with arrogance, hubris, and impulsive choices that reminded everyone, including the audience, that Vegeta had not fully shed his old self. He was still competitive, still ruthless, still flawed. But the foundation for his eventual redemption had been laid. He could now fight not just for pride, but with purpose, even if he didn't fully recognize it yet. It was during this era that his relationship with Bulma began to quietly shape him. Unlike the epic battles with Goku or the life-or-death struggles against androids, this was an intimate, humanizing development. Through Bulma, Vegeta experienced a life beyond combat, a perspective rooted in love, companionship, and domestic responsibility. These scenes, subtle though they were, revealed a side of Vegeta rarely seen: the potential for loyalty, vulnerability, and care. The Saiyan Prince, once defined entirely by ambition and aggression, was learning the value of connection. Fatherhood further deepened this transformation. The birth of Trunks added another layer of humanity to Vegeta. While he initially struggled to express affection in conventional ways, his protective instincts and pride as a father began to influence his actions in subtle yet meaningful ways. For the first time, Vegeta's choices were not just about defeating Goku or proving his supremacy, they were about ensuring a future for someone else. This duality, pride mixed with responsibility, became a hallmark of his character. However, Vegeta's path as an anti-hero was far from linear. During the Cell games, his arrogance resurfaced at critical moments. He allowed his desire to prove superiority to cloud judgment, even abandoning opportunities to fight Cell more strategically. These missteps served as a reminder that Vegeta's redemption was a process, not a sudden transformation. His pride still dominated, but it was gradually tempered by experience, responsibility, and the relationships he had begun to value. The anti-hero phase is what makes Vegeta's story so compelling. Unlike a character who turns good overnight, Vegeta's morality is messy, conflicted, and deeply human. He can be selfish, vain, and even cruel at times, but he can also show restraint, courage, and selflessness. The audience is invited to witness his struggle, to empathize with his failures, and to celebrate his incremental victories. By the end of the Cell Saga, Vegeta had firmly established himself as more than just a rival to Goku. He had become a warrior capable of moral complexity, a man who could fight for personal ambition and still protect those he cared about. The transformation from villain to anti-hero was now complete, setting the stage for even greater challenges ahead, where his past pride would continue to collide with his emerging sense of honor and responsibility. Vegeta's journey through this stage demonstrates the brilliance of Toriyama's storytelling. A character who begins as a straightforward antagonist evolves into one of the most nuanced figures in the franchise. He is not a hero in the traditional sense, but his growth is undeniable. The seeds planted on Namek had taken root, and Vegeta was beginning to grow into the hero he would ultimately become. Vegeta's journey toward redemption faced its greatest test during the Majin Buu saga. By this point, he was no longer a pure antagonist nor a simple anti-hero. He was a man at war with himself. His past, his pride, and his lingering desire to surpass Goku created a volatile internal conflict. This was the moment where his redemption arc was challenged like never before, forcing him to confront the darkest parts of his nature. The arrival of Babidi and the offer of Majin power presented a dangerous temptation. Vegeta, aware that Goku had surpassed him once again, allowed himself to be consumed by the very pride that had defined him for decades. By accepting Babidi's influence, he embraced the Majin persona, a return to the ruthlessness of his past. Yet, this act was not purely villainous. It was a raw expression of his frustration, envy, and deep-seated desire to reclaim his sense of superiority. What makes this arc so compelling is the duality it creates. On one hand, Vegeta is willing to indulge in evil for power. On the other hand, he remains conscious of the consequences and, crucially, of his family. Unlike earlier stages of his life, Vegeta's choices are now influenced not just by ambition, but by a growing sense of attachment and responsibility. This internal struggle is the very essence of his character, a man torn between who he was and who he wants to become. The climactic moment comes in his battle with Majin Buu. Realizing the threat Buu poses to the world and to his loved ones, Vegeta makes a choice that defines his redemption. He decides to sacrifice himself in a desperate attempt to stop the monster, an act of true heroism that contrasts sharply with his previous self-centered motivations. For the first time, Vegeta acts entirely for others, not for pride, vengeance, or recognition. He is willing to give his life to protect those he loves, including Goku, the rival he once sought to destroy. This sacrifice is the turning point of Vegeta's arc. It is not perfect redemption. He still carries guilt, regret, and flaws, but it represents a decisive break from his past. The Majin temptation forces him to confront the destructive patterns of his pride and to choose a path of selflessness, even if only for a moment. Moreover, this act reshapes the audience's perception of Vegeta. From villain to anti-hero to someone capable of genuine sacrifice, he demonstrates the depth and complexity of his character. His decision is heroic, not because it is grandiose or celebrated, but because it is deeply human. It is flawed, painful, and uncertain, but it is the first true step toward the Vegeta fans would come to admire in Dragon Ball Super. The Majin temptation, therefore, is both a literal and symbolic battle. Literally, Vegeta fights Buu to save the world. Symbolically, he fights the darkness within himself, the pride and envy that have defined him since childhood. By facing both, he emerges not as a perfect hero, but as a man transformed, a man capable of choosing honor over ego. By the time Dragon Ball Super begins, Vegeta has undergone a profound transformation. The proud, ruthless Saiyan prince who once defined himself solely by power and rivalry, is now a more balanced warrior. However, this balance does not mean he has abandoned his pride or ambition. Rather, it reflects a maturity that allows him to channel his abilities and desires in more purposeful ways. In Battle of Gods, Vegeta's growth is immediately apparent. While still competitive and prone to jealousy, especially regarding Goku's achievements, he begins to fight with awareness beyond mere personal gain. Observing Beerus, the god of destruction, and interacting with Whis introduces Vegeta to new philosophies of combat and strength. He learns that raw power is only part of the equation. Discipline, strategy, and understanding one's own limits are equally crucial. This training marks the start of a new chapter in his journey, one in which pride coexists with wisdom. During Resurrection F, Vegeta's evolution continues. He fights to protect Earth, not simply to prove himself. Though still competitive with Goku, his motivations are layered. He fights for his family, his planet, and the allies he once considered mere tools. These battles underscore a critical aspect of his redemption. Vegeta is no longer motivated solely by rivalry, but by responsibility and honor. His power is a means to an end, rather than an end in itself. Perhaps the most significant development in this era is his approach to training and growth. Under Whis, Vegeta begins to understand that surpassing Goku is not about obsession, but self-improvement. This philosophical shift marks a critical turning point. Vegeta is no longer defined by envy. He still desires to be the strongest, but now that desire is coupled with strategy, restraint, and a sense of purpose. Vegeta's evolution also extends to his personal life. His bond with Bulma and Trunks strengthens, and these relationships inform his actions on and off the battlefield. He begins to embrace roles beyond fighter or rival, becoming a protector, father, and leader. This development humanizes him in ways that his earlier arcs could not, showing that his strength is not only physical but also moral and emotional. It is during this period that Vegeta begins experimenting with Ultra Ego, a state that embodies his Saiyan pride but channels it with precision and responsibility. Unlike his reckless Majin days, Ultra Ego demonstrates a warrior who can embrace the power and pride of his heritage while exercising discipline and control. This ability is not just a power-up, it is a reflection of his journey, a fusion of pride, experience, and self-awareness. Ultimately, this era establishes Vegeta as a new kind of warrior, one who balances pride with responsibility, rivalry with respect, and power with wisdom. His journey illustrates that true strength is not measured solely in combat, but in the ability to grow, adapt, and fight for something larger than oneself. In this way, Vegeta embodies a uniquely human kind of heroism, one built on struggle, introspection, and hard-earned self-realization. The Tournament of Power represents the culmination of Vegeta's long, turbulent journey. For decades, he had struggled with pride, envy, and the shadow of Goku's accomplishments. Now, in a contest where the fate of multiple universes hung in the balance, Vegeta was finally forced to confront what it truly meant to fight, not for himself, not for rivalry, but for the greater good. Throughout the tournament, Vegeta's actions reveal the depth of his growth. No longer consumed by petty envy or reckless ambition, he demonstrates strategic thinking, leadership, and selflessness. He fights to protect his universe, his family, and his comrades, showing a commitment far beyond what his younger, pride-driven self could have imagined. Every punch and every maneuver reflects not just skill, but a warrior who has learned to balance strength with wisdom and purpose. The most pivotal moment comes during his confrontation with Toppo and Jiren, where Vegeta fully embodies the lessons of his past. He no longer fights to surpass Goku alone. He fights to protect the lives of those he loves and the universe itself. This shift is monumental. Vegeta's pride remains, but it is tempered by responsibility. For the first time, his power is wielded in true service of others, rather than solely for personal glory. Vegeta's respect for Goku also reaches its peak. Rather than viewing him as an enemy or rival to be surpassed, he acknowledges Goku as an equal, sometimes even a source of inspiration. Their rivalry evolves into mutual respect, and in that respect, Vegeta finds a new dimension of strength. He realizes that redemption is not about defeating Goku, but about becoming the best version of himself while honoring those around him. Though Goku achieves Ultra Instinct, Vegeta discovers Ultra Ego, a state that complements his personality and growth. Ultra Ego is not just a new form, it is the embodiment of Vegeta's journey. It channels his Saiyan pride with discipline, courage, and responsibility. In mastering it, Vegeta shows that his redemption is not a surrender of identity, but the refinement of it. He has become a warrior who is still fierce, still ambitious, but now guided by principle and purpose. Ultimately, the Tournament of Power is where Vegeta's redemption solidifies. His heroism is neither dramatic nor ostentatious. It is quiet, calculated, and deeply human. He is transformed from a prideful, ruthless prince into a protector, a strategist, a father, and a warrior capable of moral clarity. This moment cements his journey as one of the most compelling in Dragon Ball history, a redemption forged through struggle, sacrifice, and self-awareness. Vegeta's story in the Tournament of Power is not just about power or victory, it is about evolution, humility, and the conscious choice to fight for something greater than oneself. It is the moment when Vegeta finally earns the respect of allies and viewers alike, not as Goku's rival, not as a former villain, but as a hero in his own right. Vegeta's journey is arguably one of the richest character arcs in the Dragon Ball franchise. From a genocidal Saiyan prince to a self-aware, disciplined hero, his evolution embodies the complexity, struggle, and depth that make Dragon Ball more than just a story about power levels and battles. The legacy of Vegeta's redemption arc is not measured in the enemies he defeated or the forms he achieved, but in the growth, choices, and humanity he displayed along the way. Vegeta represents the possibility of change, even for those whose past is steeped in pride and violence. His transformation shows that redemption is not a single act, but a process, a series of challenges, failures, and hard-won insights. He did not become a hero overnight. Each battle, each loss, each emotional revelation contributed to the man he ultimately became. From his tears on Namek to his self-sacrifice as Majin Vegeta, and finally to his strategic heroism in Dragon Ball Super Vegeta's story, demonstrates that even the hardest hearts can evolve when confronted with responsibility, love, and the right kind of challenge. His relationship with Goku is central to this legacy. Once defined purely by rivalry and jealousy, it matures into a nuanced dynamic of mutual respect. Goku pushes Vegeta to grow, but Vegeta's redemption is not contingent on surpassing Goku. It is about understanding himself, his purpose, and the value of protecting others. This evolution makes him one of the most human and relatable characters in the series. His struggles mirror real-life conflicts: pride versus humility, ambition versus responsibility, ego versus empathy. Vegeta's redemption also reshapes the way audiences view heroism in Dragon Ball. Unlike Goku, who often embodies idealized heroism, optimistic, selfless, and naturally pure-hearted, Vegeta's heroism is earned through struggle. It is messy, flawed, and deeply personal. He makes mistakes, succumbs to envy, and faces moral ambiguity, yet he continues to strive for better. In doing so, he becomes a model of growth and resilience, demonstrating that heroism is as much about overcoming one's inner flaws as it is about defeating external threats. Finally, Vegeta's legacy is evident in the way he influences the world around him. His choices affect his family, his allies, and even the universes he fights to protect. He has become a protector, a mentor, and a symbol of how strength must be paired with wisdom. More than any single battle or transformation, it is this holistic growth that defines Vegeta's place in Dragon Ball history. In conclusion, Vegeta's redemption arc is a testament to the power of character development and the narrative richness of Dragon Ball. It is a story of pride tempered by responsibility, rivalry transformed into respect, and selfishness evolving into selflessness. Vegeta's journey from a ruthless Saiyan prince to a true hero serves as a reminder that the path to redemption is never linear, never easy, but always worth pursuing. His legacy is not just in the battles he fought, but in the man he became. And that is what makes his story unforgettable.